Shell, what comes up for you when we talk about knowing when to leave?
Uh, so as usual, a lot of things coming up for me today. Um, I don't even know which one to dive into, so I'm gonna switch gears a little bit because I think so many of us have gone through similar experiences and we've stayed in relationships far too long, even though there were red flags that we ignored. And this can be personal and professional. Like you conditioned to stick it out because you think things will eventually get better, or you keep receiving that message, or you're telling yourself that message that like things will get better. I can make things better. And I'm a helper. I want to be helpful. I'm here to share my gifts with the world and like give other people the opportunity to also like constantly improve themselves and like be the best version of themselves that they can be today. Um, and so it whether it's personal or professional, whatever the scenario is, I've learned that like I do need to be more trusting, but not necessarily with the other person. It's with myself. I always want to give other people the benefit of the doubt that they will live up to some expectations grandiose that I have in my head for them. And that's never going to pan out because I shouldn't be setting those expectations. I should let them just be who they are. But like trusting my gut to present those red flags and not overlook them. And so instead of talking about personal relationships or professional relationships, I want to talk a little bit more about like making connections in general. This week, in fact, somebody reached out and like we talk a lot about like getting those salesy DMs, people like not really wanting to connect genuinely with you. They like maybe glanced at your profile for like a split second to like see that you do this, like, oh, I see you're like helping people reach this revenue monthly or whatever the case may be. Like, do you want me to help you generate more sales? Like, thanks. Like, what are like, why would you get that from that? And it's not really adding any value. And so somebody reached out to me earlier in the week, and like sometimes I trust my gut and sometimes I still want to like poke it a little bit, and like because I'm curious, like I know it, like something comes up and I'm like, this sounds like really sketchy, like, but let's test the waters anyway, because I want to see if my own intuition is right. I want to see if I'm right about it. I want to see if they can prove me wrong. And so somebody reached out and they were like, hey, I'm doing this thing. I want to know if you want to share your story with other like-minded women. I was like, okay, this sounds interesting. Let's see who we're connected to. And like we had a few people in common, nobody that I knew really well enough to ask like if that was somebody that they knew, like, and trusted. And so I accepted the conversation warily. And like we went back and forth a little bit and it still sounded like really, really fishy to me. The more we only talked for maybe 5-10 minutes, but even in that time, like red flag, red flag, red flag, like they kept asking for my email address. And I'm like, you don't, like, why? I haven't offered anything that would suggest like that you can have this information. And also my profile is way, way open. So you can find it right there in many, many places. So do your homework because I've looked at your profile. Hey, they don't know that about me. Like, they don't know that I'm like, I want to know what I'm jumping into before I even have that initial conversation. Like, I'm looking at a little bit of like to see what I can find out about you. It's not like full on detective mode, but like, what are you showing that I can easily find that tells me like who you are and how I can relate to you? Because if you're not adding value for me to know, I want to at least do my part to try to connect with you in some way and make it a real conversation. That's what like drives me and fuels me, is like, how do I relate to other people in the world? And so this woman, we're having this conversation for these few minutes and she keeps asking for my email address. And I'm like, I'm right here. I'm talking to you right now. Like, why don't we skip that step of you emailing me to send me a link to sign up for a time slot to have a 20-minute conversation to get to know each other better? I'm like, just tell me what time you're free this week and like, we'll set a time. And again, she asked for my email. And so I was like, all right, like, I'm not going to give you my email. I'll give you my, let's have a virtual coffee. Like, I'm going to give you my link. I'm gonna skip the bullshit and like I'm gonna see if you take this bait and like turn it back on you. And what do you know, like 5 minutes later, somebody else from that company books the call with me. So it's not even the person that was interacting with me, unless it was really that person. It's just like one red flag after another. And you know what? My curiosity is still like red flag, but like I'm kind of curious now. Like, what could they possibly tell me? Let's go into this conversation, like knowing that this is not something to engage with, but like I want to see what they bring to the table. I'm like, so knowing when to leave is definitely a challenge for me because I often want to like test the waters and see what else is possible, even when I know that something is wrong. And so that is across the board with all different kinds of connections, wherever they may be. And so that was what was coming up for me most strongly. Thank you, everyone, for sharing, because it allowed me to formulate that thought and share it with you guys.
Thank you for sharing, Shell. I mean, that's a lot to unpack about the DMs that come into our social media platforms and what their intent is. And I know for myself, it's taken me a bit to kind of learn the dance around social media, around the communication dance, right? And at first, I found it endearing, if you will, when I had those DMs coming into me and people asking things about me and such. And oh, I didn't have a good filter on at first. I was really open and not so much discerning, and my boundaries weren't firmly in place. And it is very quick that we can get into situations that don't serve us well. And now I am feeling like you, Shell, the more personal development work I do, the more I know myself, and certainly the more I practice putting my boundaries in place, the better prepared I am when people show up through direct messaging on different platforms. Now I too can be curious and at the same time discerning. And that is a skill that I've had to develop because, as we've all alluded to, when we're young, we don't really know ourselves well enough. And I know for many of us, our story of those people pleasing tendencies and like Shell said, right? Knowing that something was off, getting that intuitive hit and not listening to it. And so it's just so empowering to be in this group right now and to hear these deeper stories and to hear how not only have we become more aware, but we're acting on that intuition now. So
Yeah.
what a great share, Shell.
It
Thank you.
actually almost for me becomes like more playful once I do recognize it,
Mm,
because then I like can test the limits and the boundaries to get to know myself better, but to also like, uh, yeah, I want to see if my gut was right, but like
mm,
I want to see what the other person is capable of, and so
right.
I know where my boundary lies, and so I can acknowledge it within myself, and that other person doesn't even need to know that that boundary exists because it's there firmly, but like
Mm,
now I'm just playing around. Now I'm curious and want to know all the possibilities. So it's kind of fun to play in that way once you like get a handle or a better hand grasp of like what you're capable of and when you know yourself better.
mm, love that, Shell.